Zenless Zone Zero, or as my friends would call it, ZZZZZZ, has been out for over a week now, and many players, myself included, have been having a blast exploring and combating through the hollows around the city of New Eridu. That being said, not everything has really been all smooth sailing, and there are a lot of problems in various aspects of the game that many in the community have been pointing out. Thankfully, though a whole lot of them might seem like big problems, I for one think that these issues have some fundamentally simple solutions that can not only solve these problems, but also enhance the game's overall experience. I'm going to be using this video to go over them real quick and suggest some more features that Hoyo can hopefully consider to put in the game. Without further ado, the name's Leafy, and welcome to Let's Talk Slow About Games, Zenless Zone Zero Edition. Let's start this off with the most obvious problem of it all, which is the difficulty. While the combat mechanics itself are rather fun to play with, for a lot of the people who are looking for a more combat-centric approach in the game, the difficulty of the enemies we face are the ones that tends to pose a bit of a lackluster experience. Specifically, in the early game, enemies barely fight back, we can miss dodges and parries without much of a punishment, and boss mechanics are very easily learnable when they don't exactly have a lot of variety and speed, even when you've turned on the so-called challenge mode. Solutions here are quite simple. Not only should they increase the aggressiveness of these enemies, but they also should hit way harder. At least, the boss should at least hit harder in challenge mode. Combining increased aggressiveness with a bit of an HP increase and a time limit for more rewards is really where the sweet spot of difficulty scaling will be found. As it stands, even the timed hard mode that exists parallel to the story mode stages would have only been difficult had it actually went through all the combat stages that the original story level has. Because at the moment, the current hard mode stages cut a decent portion of what its original stage looks like. So I think using the full length of the stage would have made a better challenge in regards to its timed nature. Okay, with that all being said though, if I were to be fully honest, when it comes to the mid-game content, I've been finding myself somewhat challenged by the increasingly plentiful mechanic that the bosses are beginning to have, such as the ones in Notorious Hunts and mid-level Hollow Zero campaigns. It's not exceedingly hard per se, but it definitely is forcing me to consider my moves a bit further. However, I'm well aware that people are looking for even harder endgame content that would mirror that of the kinds of combat you'll see in the Souls-like genre, where you'd have to spend 95% of your boss fights dodging and poking their toes every now and then. If I were to be really frank with this, I probably wouldn't be one to enjoy that kind of difficulty spike. But I kinda get what people are trying to go for here. They want a challenging dodge fast while looking at new and increasingly more difficult boss mechanics and more variety within boss mechanics. And maybe there is a way to have that in the game. With the combat mechanic that we have, however, I think there is a way to use this need for a higher difficulty ceiling to see if we can add a little more to the combat features, namely, the use of the Decibel ultimate mechanic. Personally, I would have really loved it if we could find a way to chain these ultimates in a way that makes it possible to have each individual team members to have their own Decibel charge. This will not only provide a cool new combo that players can try to chain with, but it can also be the gateway to extracting more damage from the characters we have in hand to fight against the tougher and more robust endgame enemies. In a more idealistic world, I would have wanted for this game to have the same kind of elemental interaction that Genshin has, because I genuinely love that way of doing combat, and I've yet to see another gacha game feature that kind of combat mechanic the way Genshin does. That being said, while it would have been great to see that sort of mechanic in Zenless, I think creating more ways of chaining your combos would be a way that is more fundamentally in line with how Hoyo had designed Zenless's combat. Another way that ultimate chaining combo can work is to employ joint character attacks the way games such as Tales of Arise would do. Not only would this be a great way to increase your team's damage output, but it's also a great way to extract more visual creativity with how much better combat can look. But don't get me wrong here. It certainly is a big ask for me to even suggest these kind of features, but I think these features can solidify Zenless's stance as a more casual combat-centric game. The small buffs that you get from having certain characters pair up with other characters in the team is already such a cool little aspect that I practically have once suggested for Genshin to have. But why not push it further when you've already got the story for which characters can do joint ultimates with, such as Anbi doing combos with Nicole, maybe Billy and Anbi instead, and we even technically already have a glimpse of this sort of joint kind of combo thing with what we can see from Kolida and Ben. So it'll be cool to see that feature be expanded to a more general roster. Another thing I would really love to see is the ability to parry enemy attacks with character skills, just like the way you can do it in Wuthering Waves. At the moment, you can only dodge enemy attacks with your skills because most of them will have an invulnerability property, or at the very least, anti-interruption increase when you activate them. But it doesn't contribute towards interrupting an enemy attack or inflicting that extra daze that perfect assist and assist follow-ups will do. They should also consider making it so that these skill parries will yield more decibel energy regen, therefore making it easier for decibels to be generated if we do end up having multiple charges of it. Moving on from the combat mechanics side of things though, I'm going to briefly touch upon an aspect of the game that many people seems to have loathed, which is the TV mechanic. And honestly, I get it. Particularly in a story setting, these TVs are extremely tedious and are more than likely to be a nuisance for most players. The only reason I get to enjoy it is because I've personally played something far worse, and I quite like the downtime that it provides between all the combating that we need to do. Especially in Hollow Zero campaigns, I genuinely like the way they have used them to create a different puzzle exploration experience from what we'd see from other gacha games. That being said, I still understand that the boredom and overall unintuitive gameplay can cause people to groan at the sight of it. However, I'm not quite sure if there is quite a simple solution for this other than to convert the base gameplay and puzzles of the TVs into the kind of semi-exploration tasks that we get from rally commissions, exploring the actual Hollow map itself instead of a TV gameplay. The special events can really be people that we actually meet within the Hollow, and the other buffs and Hollow Zero mechanic can exist as it is. What do y'all think about this kind of solution, as it might be a big change when it comes to the game size as well. Now let's get out of gameplay and talk about the issues within the game's features, quality of life, and overall components. First off is the loading screens. For a game that's half the size of Genshin, it sure does take a long while for it to get through all those loading screens, particularly that starting file check. And considering the amount of loading time that people have to go through when they go through menus, maps, and general exploration, Hoyo should really consider optimizing this in the long run. Optimizing for lower end devices and phones are also issues that they should prioritize in improving very soon, since the game is currently very suited for mobile experience, yet the game itself is not easily accessible by them. While I personally don't suffer from any of these optimization issues, hearing that people simply couldn't launch the game is quite unfortunate, and it would be great if these issues get solved so that more people can actually give the game a try. I still consider these issues to have rather easy solutions in practice since the game has just came out, and we should give them the time to actually sort through these optimization issues. Polish is something that Hoyo would normally get right with their games, so I don't really see this becoming a long-term issue. However, there are other issues that I think persist which could really be detrimental to the playability of the game in a future and long-term scenario. A rather small flaw, but quite significant to me, is the whole instructions and text cutting out due to the text box lack of space, and the fact that an attempt to scroll them will occasionally cause it to skip it out instead. I gave Wuthering Waves a lot of shit for this, and it's not gonna be any different for Zenless, especially with the fact that this sort of thing was never really an issue in Genshin, nor in Star Rail. It's a small flaw, but it really shouldn't have been there in the first place. And another miscellaneous aspect that I wish they worked on a bit more is the gacha screens. While the rates for each banner seems to be fine and all, the animation for when you get certain characters just doesn't inspire any sort of excitement. I genuinely can barely feel the difference between getting an A-tier character with an S-tier character, so maybe they can consider making more grandiose effects for the S-rank characters, but considering how Genshin has never seen a change with their gacha animations for 4 years now, I'd be hard-pressed to see them change anything for this one anytime soon. And the last thing that I think should be addressed is how far events and several game contents are locked behind the story and tutorial missions, and how far you have to go into the game to even get a glimpse of them in the first place. I understand that it is for the sake of clarity and to make sure that players who get to play those contents actually understand the gameplay and are not overwhelmed when they get there, but I can only cite that sort of justification when it comes to mid and end game content. But for events? Really? The first of Zenless's game events, titled Friendship Supervision, had just came out, but it requires players to reach Internaut level 30 and to have completed chapter 2 of the main story. Even for someone who's willing to spend the time like me, I think for a lot of people, this could be a massive turnoff. There aren't many who are willing to slog through the story just so that they can play what seems to be a rather relaxed event. Completing the intermission chapter is still quite a lot. It can still be justified in some convoluted ways such as story immersion, but needing to reach Internaut level 30 on top of that seems to be quite the stretch. This is definitely something that needs to be given a workaround soon enough, so that new players in the future don't get easily discouraged when they come in and see that they are miles off from ever even accessing the event itself, let alone taking part in it. That's about all the solutions and ideas I have to tackle some of Zenless's current biggest issues. I do believe that this game will have its place in the gacha industry, and some might argue that it even already has its place within the current gacha market. But I think they still have a few major fixes to go through before they can finally solidify their position and maintain a healthy player base and market share. Thankfully, Hoyo is no strangers to maintaining these casual niche types of games in the first place. Look at Tears of Themis. If they can keep that game well oiled, then Zenless is sure to live a long life. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video, or at least have found it to be helpful in some shape or form. Leave a like if you did, and do share your thoughts in the comments down below if you have any. Until the next video, my name's Leafy, and I will see you all next time. Sayonara.